thank you for coming. My name is Naomi Kahn. I work for an organization called Regavim. Regavim literally means
clumps of earth.
That's correct. Small mounds of earth. It's a name that actually resonates quite a lot for Israelis, for native Hebrew speakers. In the pre-state period, there were all these pioneer songs that talked about redeeming the land one little clump of earth at a time, which is why the original name for the organization, which was the National Land Protection Trust, which was too long and too complicated, was shortened to Regavim. Unfortunately, I didn't work there at the time. I would have advised against, since it is not a name that means anything to non-Hebrew speakers. But now you're in the know. So that's what Regavim is about. Regavim literally tries to protect the land of Israel one small clump of earth at a time. Taking a pixelated view of the entire land of Israel, we try to protect the most basic resources that the nation of Israel has, and that really starts with the land itself. So what I want to show you this evening is essentially what we call the quiet war, the quiet battleground for the land of Israel. Now, before we begin, I just want to give you some warning about what it is that we stand for. I don't know if anyone here in this room has any problem with it. There are obviously people that they're worried about out there who have a problem with it. And I got some interesting press releases today that have a big problem with it. So I will tell you what we are and what we are not. So, out there. So what we are is an organization, almost all, it's a massively influential organization, but altogether we are 12 people. We cover the entire land of Israel. Yes, there are 12 of us. And as of today, 11. And I'll tell you more about that in a minute. We cover the entire land of Israel, including Judea and Samaria. Quite a lot about what I'm going to speak about tonight has to do with Judea and Samaria. And we firmly believe, as a law-based organization, that the Jewish people have an incontrovertible right to the land in Judea and Samaria, that it always has been and always should be an inalienable part of the Jewish homeland. It is actually the cradle of Jewish national identity, and we therefore are unabashed supporters of Jewish sovereignty over Judea and Samaria. Anyone who has an issue with that, I hope that by the end of the evening I will explain why we believe that that is the case from a legal standpoint. Now, I just want to stress, and I actually had an interesting conversation earlier this week with a group of Christian evangelists who came to Israel, and the arguments that they wanted me to make all had to do with faith and the Bible and all of these other things. And I said, those are the things that perhaps motivate you, and those are definitely the things that keep us from giving up when it seems like we are fighting tremendous odds, but those are not the things with which we go to court. And what we do at Regavim is we deal in facts. We deal in facts that are quantifiable and that are judicable. So what we do is collect facts, analyze facts, present facts, and sometimes prosecute using facts. And I'm going to try to show you some of those to help you understand what we do, why we do it, and how we do it. So, although this may seem a little strange, I'm going to read to you as a sort of introduction, so you get an idea of what Regavim isn't. I'm going to read the press release that I was forwarded today. It was sent out by Just Peace Advocates of Canada. I had never heard of this organization before. They've obviously heard of us. Immediate release. Foreign settler colonial NGO founded by a proud homophobe receiving Canadian subsidies. In Toronto this week, a group founded by an openly racist and homophobic politician recently made overlord over the West Bank, a new far-right Israeli government will be fundraising with Canadian taxpayer support. Jerusalem-based Regavim has 4 events scheduled in the Greater Toronto area. So, in that 1.5 sentences, there is not one single word that is actually correct. Okay, let's carry on. Regavim was founded by Bezalel Smotrich. That is actually partially correct. Who was recently granted special power to control the lives of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians. A, incorrect. B, incorrect. Amidst these discussions, Israeli paper Haaretz recently noted, and this is the only time that I can actually say, well, I'll read on. The Regavim NGO and Bezalel Smotrich don't want law and order. They want to use more force against the Arabs. Israeli professor Neve Gordon has labeled Regavim a settler colonial NGO, while Haaretz called them, and here's where I actually agree with Haaretz, one of the most prominent right-wing groups in Israel today. Unfortunately, Haaretz thinks that the term right-wing is derogatory. We don't. And we'd have to ask ourselves what is right and what is left, but that's a more philosophical talk, not for this evening. According to Defund Racism, Regavim works to expand Jewish control of land across Israel and the Palestinian occupied territories by pushing Israeli administrative, judicial, legislative, and military bodies to dispossess Palestinian and other non-Jewish communities of their land. Goes on in this vein. And by the time the evening is over, we'll come back to this, and hopefully you will understand why this is complete falsehood, fabrication, misrepresentation of reality and of law and of history. So we'll start from the beginning, and we'll have a look at some of the facts, just to give us an idea of what is legal, what is illegal, and why, and what we can do in order to protect Israel's interests and the interests of the Jewish people, using the law and the tools that we have at our disposal, taking our sovereignty seriously, and making a better future possible for everyone who lives in the land of Israel under Israeli sovereignty. Preface: Zionism. Zionism is not a dirty word. We're in favor. It once was beyond question that Zionism meant Jewish settlement in the land of Israel. That is unfortunately now called into question. Zionism is a much slandered word, and it has become a very, very not politically correct term. We're Zionists, and the reason I'm here is because I hope that you are too, and that we can agree by the end of the evening how to act on our Zionism in the 21st century. So again, Regavim protects Israel's resources as an expression of Israeli sovereignty. And now we're going to try to make this run. Right. So what we do, we divide the country up into regions, and we have field coordinators who go out and see actually what is happening on the ground everywhere in the land of Israel every day. That means observing, documenting, and then researching every single instance of the use of the land resource itself. Who's building, who's planting, by what permission, and to what ends. So again, these are some of the tools that we use. Photography, observation, a lot of legwork. We use drones. We take a lot of pictures. We take them with exact, precise GIS coordinates in order to build a case and prosecute when necessary. Generally, and again, I will stress this again, we don't prosecute Arab squatters. We don't have any contact with people who are living illegally, building illegally, planting illegally. Our focus is the government of Israel. What we try to do is to empower, coax, sometimes force, through legal means, the government of Israel to behave like a sovereign government and protect our national interests. So when we take a case and we go to court, the people we're suing are the Minister of Defense, the head of the civil administration, and the government of Israel itself. And we do this all the time. Some of our reports, such as this one, I have some hard copies here, have actually completely revolutionized land use policy in Israel. We'll talk about more of that as we get further into it. These are some of our more impactful reports. This report is now the basis for the coalition negotiations having to do with the Negev. Our report on the practice of polygamy in the Bedouin sector has created an interministerial task force that has finally begun to prosecute Bedouin lawbreakers in the Negev, and is the first real prison sentence for polygamy was handed down last week. We'll talk about that a little bit more. But these are some of the examples of cases that we have won. This, for example, we sued the United Nations, and we sued the government of Israel for failing to protect the land in Jerusalem on which the United Nations is squatting illegally. So this is the Mercy Gate. We went to court and twice had this shut down. A new mosque was opened up in the Mercy Gate, or the Golden Gate, in the old city. Completely illegal and a violation of the status quo. And as you'll see as we get further into the casework, the status quo on the Temple Mount and in Jerusalem itself it's a one-sided status quo. In other words, there's no such thing as a status quo that's one-sided. And we found the exact same problem all over. The state of Israel has imposed upon itself restrictions of various kinds and upholds them scrupulously, while the other side is allowed to completely violate the law and change the facts on the ground to our detriment. These are some more of our reports. We'll talk about them as we get into it. But first I want to start with a small, brief, rapid, but important history lesson so that we can all understand what makes something legal and illegal. Right? So this is the map that emerged at the Cairo conference. This is essentially the map that divided up all the territories of the defunct Ottoman Empire and created, set aside land in the land of Israel for a Jewish homeland. And what you see are two different colors. We're going to talk about this a little bit more in depth because it's very, very important. This entire area, everything you see here in both shades of yellowish, was set aside by the nations of the world and eventually became the map for the Jewish homeland. Now, for those of you who know what the map of Israel looks like, here's a spoiler, it doesn't look like this. What happened was that Churchill woke up one morning and lopped off nearly 80% of the land set aside for the state of Israel and created Jordan for reasons that anyone who knows a little bit about the geopolitics at the time will understand. They needed the cooperation of the Hashemites in other spheres, so they cut a deal with them, created Jordan. It was called Transjordan because it was on the other side of the Jordan River. Now, the important thing is that of the approximately 23% that was left over for the Jewish homeland, pay attention to what is in there. Everything west of the Jordan River was Israel, right? This was the map upon which all of the nations of the world agreed. 51 nations at the time, that's all there were, really. And that is what the map of Israel should have looked like at the moment that independence was declared in 1948.
When was the Cairo conference?
Pardon me? 1922. Okay, so this was the practical side of what's the San Remo conference. and was eventually adopted as law as part of the United Nations Charter. All of the mandatory maps looked like that, right? So, under every principle of international law that is known to man, that is what the State of Israel should have looked like at the moment of independence. The boundaries of the mandate for Palestine were automatically, or all the mandates were automatically assumed and subsumed in the nations that became independent afterwards. That includes Lebanon, Syria, all the other countries that were controlled by mandates at the time. Unfortunately, Israel, once again, is the exception for reasons that aren't politically correct to say out loud, but because we are always held to a different standard. When this was created, this is the first two-state solution. Right? You'll hear two-state solution over and over and over again in international parlance. This was the first attempt to create a peaceful resolution so that there would be no more bloodshed, because there were already all kinds of Arab uprisings, pogroms, and the Arabs were, let's say, displeased with the growing Jewish presence in the land of Israel. So this two-state solution didn't actually work. It did not stop the bloodshed, and all the Arab countries, this is the partition plan, which was never ratified and has no legal standing, but you'll hear over and over again, people refer to this map, which is worthless. This is what the map looked like, actually, after the War of Independence was over and an armistice was signed. Now, carefully look again at the same area, and you'll notice that on the west side of the Jordan, the Jordanians invaded, occupied, and eventually annexed some of this area that was meant to be part of Israel. And because this was an act of aggression, and it was an occupation and annexation, the nations of the world unilaterally, universally condemned this situation. All but two countries, only two countries in the world recognized this Jordanian annexation west of the Jordan. One of them, again, was Great Britain for the same reasons, and the other was Pakistan. Okay. So this was illegal, was considered illegal by the nations of the world, and was never recognized. And that's what the map looked like for 19 years until 1967, when Israel liberated those territories. This is the crux of the question. What makes something legal or illegal? When Israel returned to the areas to the west of the Jordan that had been illegally taken by Jordan, it was not occupying this territory. Because the Jordanian possession was never recognized and was illegal, and because this was always considered part of the Jewish homeland, the Jewish state, the state of Israel, you cannot consider this occupied territory. It should have been immediately taken back into the fold of sovereign Israeli territory. But there was a problem. The problem was that there were people living there who were not Israeli, not Jewish, and didn't want us there. So the State of Israel voluntarily decided to hold the situation in abeyance and to negotiate a political resolution for the people living in that territory. I stress, for the people, not for the territory. There was never any concession that Israel would give up territory to the hostile neighbors that had illegally occupied it. And there's where Israel's big mistake started, and we've been trying to deal with that mistake ever since. For 55 years, the situation, this temporary situation that was supposed to be resolved through immediate negotiations, has been maintained, which means that this area, a slightly different color, the area that had been illegally occupied by Jordan, is in limbo. What is the legal situation there now? The State of Israel has not extended Israeli law. So automatically, under all international law, land that is held either disputed or occupied territory, what legal system is in force? The legal system of the previous recognized sovereign. Who was it? It wasn't Jordan. It goes all the way back to the Ottoman Empire. Now, the Ottoman Empire went out of fashion with World War I. The Ottoman Empire didn't exist, but we're still stuck today in 2022 with Ottoman law in this territory. And that's where the situation starts to spiral out of control. Under all systems of law, the state of Israel is required to maintain law and order here, to issue building permits, to oversee the use of resources. And that's what the map should look like. The map changed again back here, 1995, the Oslo Accords. Judea and Samaria was divided into 3 distinct regions. Hard to see in this picture, but there's a difference of shading here. The red areas are A and B, handed over to the Palestinian Authority, and all the yellow is Area C. This green is the Y Plantation nature reserves that were given over also to the Palestinian Authority in order to balance out the land allotments. So this is what the map should look like since 1995. It should have had an intense period of negotiation and didn't. But, as we said before, there's a one-sided status quo. This is what the map really looks like. And what you see here, all those purple dots, are illegal Arab takeovers of land in Area C. That's the situation as we documented it in 2013. And it's gotten worse and worse. And this is how it's gotten worse and worse. Look carefully at what you see here. Notice the European Union symbols on the sides of all of these there. All of this, all of this, all of this, all of this. All of these squatters' camps are essentially changing the map of Area C, the areas under Israeli jurisdiction, with massive European support and funding, taking advantage of Israel's, let's call it fear, or let's say reluctance to confront international actors of this magnitude. So we've tracked the construction of these illegal squatters' camps, and you'll notice that almost all of these structures are identical. Most of these squatters' camps, and this is all in the region just outside Jerusalem, most of these squatters' camps have 80% of their structures with EU symbols on the side, which means that if the European Union didn't pay for them to be there, they wouldn't exist. This will give you an aerial view taken from one of our drones, and this is already going back 6 years, of just how extensive this is. This is all along Highway 1. It's a pretty significant road. Connects the capital of Israel to its eastern border, going all the way from Jerusalem down to the Dead Sea, and from Jerusalem to Tel Aviv and beyond. And what you see at the top of all these ridges on all of the commanding overlooks of the main highway are illegal squatters' camps that are taking possession of the land, resource, and strategic areas. We tracked this over and over, and there's another one, another view. Now, it's not 1 or 2 shacks, and it's not random, and it's not because these people have nowhere to live. It's because the Palestinian Authority takes massive funding that is provided to it by malign actors. That includes church organizations and hostile governments and the European Union itself, and builds them in strategic areas, and then incentivizes people to move into them in order to take control. So none of this should surprise anyone, because you can go on the internet, the same way I did, and download this document. This is what is known as the Fayyad Plan. In 2009, the Prime Minister of the Palestinian Authority announced publicly, with international support, that the Oslo framework was over, finished, dead, no longer binding, and that the state of Palestine would now be unilaterally created in Area C, because areas A and B were already under their control. So they began to set up this network of illegal outposts. Now, here's the map. This is Jerusalem. You notice the concentration all around Jerusalem, cutting Jerusalem off from the rest of the country, more or less, and creating this spine for a Palestinian state, which actually threatens Jordan probably more than it threatens Israel. But it's very strategically laid out. The difference between the purple dots and the green dots is the green dots are all the illegal outposts in which we found 80% or more structures provided by the European Union. That's a lot of structures. So we began to track all of that. We began to make a lot of noise. We began to sue the government over and over and over again because it had failed to do its job and protect the land resources, confront the international actors that were abetting the Palestinian Authority's takeover in these strategic areas. And eventually, we got Prime Minister Netanyahu to confront the representative of the European Union and to demand that they stop all that illegal construction, particularly in the E1 area. And Federica Mogherini got up, made an announcement that they would no longer be funding illegal construction. So what did they do instead? They did this. They didn't give up the war, they just changed tactics. This is a report. I have one copy of it here. You can see all of these things on our website. The Palestinian Authority began to take advantage of the fact that Israeli law is not applied in these areas, and Ottoman land law is. Now, Ottoman land law says that if you take a piece of land, no matter how you got it, even if it's not yours, even if it belongs to the state or belongs to another individual, or you killed the person who owns it, and you plant on it, and no one protests for a certain amount of time, you get rights to it. So what did they do? They began planting, massive planting, all through the same sections where they weren't building anymore and beyond, creating the exact same pattern, taking over the land. The civil administration, which is in charge of enforcing Israeli law, or enforcing the law on behalf of Israel in these areas, simply takes a pencil and rather than fighting all of this, changes the map. So we have lost approximately, I won't even tell you how much, but the Palestinian Authority at the very beginning of the division of the territory got 40% of Judea and Samaria, and Israel got 60%. And now, with all these agricultural and construction takeovers, the balance has shifted to 60-40 in their favor. We've lost 20% of the land that we originally were allotted by the Oslo Agreement. Because there is no vacuum, it's a one-sided status quo, and the other side has the exact opposite goal. So, in addition to that, we found all through the territory, and I'm going to run through all of these slides quickly, because what you're looking at here is another Palestinian Authority tactic. Each one of these is a school. Every time the Palestinian Authority wants to take over a piece of land, they put a school up as the first structure. First of all, because it attracts more population, and second of all, because the state of Israel looks really bad if it knocks down a school that was built illegally. You get an international outcry. There was a case like this last week where the Palestinian Authority built a school, and 1 week later, the civil administration came and knocked it down. And you have it all over the newspapers. The United States government, the European Union have all called for an inquiry into Israel's destruction, demolition of a school, and depriving the most vulnerable children of an education. The structure was standing for 1 week, had no water, electricity, sewage, nothing. It was just one of these prefab structures, Israel knocked it down after issuing work stop orders and demolition orders. So the Palestinian Authority bussed children in, sat them in there on the day that they knew the demolition was going to happen, and the entire international community made this huge, huge issue out of this fictitious school. The one you're looking at here is actually built on the Herodian World Heritage Archaeological Site. Destroyed everything in its path and just built a school in the middle of nowhere. This school was actually the site from which the United Nations broadcast its international aid package for education worldwide during the corona pandemic. They had a worldwide broadcast, and it was from this school, which is inside the municipal lines of Kochav HaShachar, a Jewish community in the Binyamin region. As you can see, it's not that this school serves a community. It's that the school is there to create a community, to anchor population in a place that is empty, that the Palestinian Authority has slated to take over. So we actually did something really interesting. I'll just give you a quick look, if I can find it. Yes. We went on the Palestinian Authority's website. We downloaded the coordinates, which they publicized, of their schools in Judea and Samaria. We mapped them all out. We came up with over 100 illegal schools in Area C, most of them within 200 meters of existing schools in Palestinian Authority-controlled areas, meaning that these aren't serving any educational need. They aren't serving any communities. They're political. But it won't take a genius to figure this out, because the entire school system has a name. Anyone here speak any Arabic? The entire system of schools that look like this is called Al-Tahadi schools. Shalom, we're in the heart of Area C in Judea and Samaria, and what you see here behind me is a new illegal school building. Regavim has been alerting the civil administration about this building and over 40 others like it that the Palestinian Authority is using to create facts on the ground in Judea and Samaria, particularly on land adjacent to Jewish communities. Here we're right near Kochav HaShachar, on land that has never been officially regulated by the State of Israel, and the Palestinian Authority has jumped right in many of these types of areas, creating facts, creating communities by anchoring them with illegal school buildings. We've been, as I said, we've been tracking the development of this school and others. We've complained to the civil administration. We're about to submit a new Supreme Court petition against this construction. But as you can see, construction is carrying on. The roof of this structure was just put up in the past week. Let's go inside and have a look and see how progress is being made. This is your European taxpayers' money at work. And the State of Israel is not lifting a finger to stop this land grab before it's too late. And you can see around you that there is no community that this school building is servicing. It's the other way around. What happens is creating this permanent structure, which is used as an anchor or a draw for more population to collect and more illegal construction. Here we see they're already starting to put in desks and chairs for children, and in a week's time, when they open this building, there'll be terrible public relations photos all over the internet, and there'll be an international outcry about how the State of Israel is denying education to the underprivileged children of this community, which doesn't exist. The time to deal with this is right now, and that's why Regavim is going to the High Court of Justice to stop this illegal construction before it's too late. This is what the schools, this is the map of the schools. It's not very clear, but all those red dots are schools. Al-Tahadi means resistance. So these schools are called resistance schools because they're there for political reasons, not for educational reasons. This is also built on archaeological sites. Here they completely upended, here we are, at Shomron, the capital of the Israelite Empire. They paved over one of the biggest archaeological sites in Shomron, built a school. massive flag, the whole thing. So I'm gonna address some of the charges that were brought up in that press release, and with that I'm going to try to bring the strands together. We hear three things. Number one is we hear that Israel is an occupier. Israel is illegally seizing lands that belong to some Palestinian entity at some point, and therefore is an illegal state, an illegal occupier behaving in illegal ways. So, as we've seen from the maps, there's no basis to that claim. But the other claims that we hear are that the reason all this illegal construction by the Palestinians takes place to begin with is because the Palestinians have to live somewhere, and Israel doesn't give them permits to build legally in Area C. So we decided to do here what we do everywhere else. We decided to collect facts and see if those claims are actually true. So we took aerial photos of all of Judea and Samaria, and we examined the situation in areas A and B. And what we discovered is that almost 70% of the land already under Palestinian Authority jurisdiction is empty, available for them to build, to develop, to make housing solutions for the people who are living under that jurisdiction. So the reason they're building in Area C is not because they have nowhere else to build, it's because it's politically motivated in order to take over areas. And we also went onto the civil administration's website and saw thousands and thousands of permit requests that were submitted. And now I'll leave you with a parting thought. When you read a press release, or when you read a Peace Now report, it will always say the percentage of permit requests submitted by the Palestinian sector that is actually approved by the State of Israel is minute, which seems to their mind to prove some sort of racism, some sort of discrimination. So I ask you, why do they always quote percentages? Why don't they tell you how many permit requests were submitted and how many were accepted? Because that's the game. The game is to play with all of our minds. The Palestinian Authority, with the help of its European funders, spends millions every year flooding the Israeli permit system with nonsensical requests. So it will send in a permit request asking for permission to build a school on the Herodian World Heritage Archaeological Site. Do you think that would be approved? No. They ask for permission to build new homes inside the municipal lines of existing Jewish communities. Do you think that would be approved? No. They ask for building permits along major Israeli highways. Do you think those will be approved? Obviously not. Why do they do this? So that at the end of the day, they can come back to all of you good people and say, thousands of, the percentage that is approved is minute. They submit these requests in order for Israel to reject them and for Israel to look bad. So the bottom line of all of this is that everyone sitting in this room and everyone you know is being used one way or another to win the war, the psychological war against Israel. And when you read the newspaper or you read a press release and you don't understand the underlying facts, you're being used, you're being abused, you're being misled. The only way that we can fight this, the only way that you can help fight this, is A, to be educated, and B, to share that, and C, when you see something like these press releases that came out today, to respond, or to help us respond. So we share our materials with the Toronto Zionist Council, with Canadians for Israel's Legal Rights, and with the Canadian Antisemitism Education Foundation, that was the one, and with every other Zionist organization that's willing to help us share them. But you guys at the other end of the supply chain need to consume information that is reliable, need to read reports that present facts, and to share them. So I leave it to you to look at our website, figure out what it is that you're being fed, figure out how you can get involved in any of these organizations. Follow Regavim. It's easy to do. Our website, our WhatsApp, our Facebook, our Twitter. I think in Hebrew they're even doing TikToks now. Horrific stuff, but it has to be done. And help us to win at least the psychological war. That will give the state of Israel, it will empower the Israeli government to fight the actual war on the ground that is still ongoing. Questions? Yes?
Please correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that the Israeli government transfers funds to the PA in large quantities.
Correct. 100% correct.
Can you repeat the question?
Leverage.
Okay. So the question is,
Why
does the Israeli government continue to fund the Palestinian Authority and transfer millions every month, tens of millions, to the Palestinian Authority, if the Palestinian Authority is clearly our enemy? The State of Israel does not categorize the Palestinian Authority as an enemy and has refused until recently, until we actually forced the previous government to reconsider, but it has failed to relate to this entire situation as an ongoing battle. No shots are fired, but we're losing this battle, this quiet battle. The State of Israel refused to acknowledge that the battle was even going on and has continued to allow the other side in this battle to be supported by Israeli taxpayer funds. And the question is why? Well, it's a complicated answer, but the short form of the answer is that the State of Israel has decided that on a cost-benefit analysis, up to date, it has been in Israel's interest to continue to maintain the existence of the Palestinian Authority so that A, Israel will not be considered an occupier, but that's not working. B, so that Israel will not have to contend with policing the large population centers that were handed over to the Palestinian Authority. That hasn't worked because, as you can see, we've had to go in there, and the Israeli army is in Jenin and Shechem and Bethlehem every single day for the past couple of months. Operation Break the Wave, I think they're calling it. All of these things that until now have been taken as givens, that it is in Israel's interest to maintain the Palestinian Authority's existence, are now being called into question. We have hope that the incoming government will revamp the entire perspective on the Palestinian Authority and demand that the Palestinian Authority either toe the line, live up to its obligations under international law, or be disbanded. We're hoping. We are hopeful.
It's always good to be hopeful. Don't count on it.
Second question.
Yes.
Why wouldn't at a certain point already Israel simply annex and arbitrarily decide how to slice and dice the agreement and the allocation of land?
Another good question. I can't speak for the Israeli government. If I could, I would. And I believe that it is in Israel's interest to proceed in that direction. However, the Israeli government has determined that there is a priority list. And in the past several years, the top priority for preserving Israel's security has been the battle against a nuclearized Iran. So it's a trade-off. And essentially, the Israeli government has been trading off this for the bigger picture, and that is nuclear Iran. Is that working? I don't think so. I think we're losing on both fronts. But what I will say is, if you look on our website and read a little bit about the case of Khan al-Ahmar, for example. Khan al-Ahmar we've been prosecuting about this tiny little, we call it the flagship of this entire system of illegal squatters camps along Route 1. We went to court about it 13 years ago. 6 times the Supreme Court, which can't really be accused of being right-wing, has found that it is illegal and must be relocated. But it's still there. It's actually grown by some 40% after all these demolition and removal orders. So Netanyahu actually was about to, when Netanyahu was prime minister and Avigdor Lieberman was defense minister, Khan al-Ahmar was supposed to be evacuated. The state of Israel invested 80 million shekel in creating a relocation site to remove the Bedouin who were squatting at the behest of the Palestinian Authority on Route 1 to a better area. They created infrastructure, electricity, water, a health clinic, and a school. And the night before, the Chancellor of Germany called Netanyahu and said, if you touch Khan al-Ahmar while I'm on my way to Israel, I will turn the plane around and I will not come back. And I thought, win-win, great. The problem was that Merkel was on her way here to sign an agreement to sell Israel nuclear submarines. And Netanyahu had a choice to make. What's more important, removing this Bedouin outpost and being charged by the International Criminal Court of war crimes, or getting nuclear submarines for Israel's Navy? The choice to Netanyahu was clear. We didn't know about this choice until afterwards. It doesn't mean that we stopped prosecuting. We are still prosecuting, and watch this space. The next hearing on Khan al-Ahmar is in February. This may be the very first challenge to the new government, to the incoming government, but it is, again, it's a flagship case. If the state of Israel cannot find the courage to stand up to illegal construction in this squatters camp on its main highway, what chance do we have of annexation of the territory, of exerting our sovereign rights throughout the territory? That's why we push the government in a small, exemplary case in order to make it clear where the holes are in Israeli policy, legislation, enforcement, and we're hoping that the incoming government will have the backbone to actually stare down all the international pressure and reassert its control over the territory. Another question. Yeah.
A couple of questions. One is, well, we can hope and speculate what might happen with the incoming Israeli government and a different administration. There's also the possibility of a change in the administration of the PA, given Abbas's age and health. So I'm wondering whether you might be interested in speculating on how that might change the dynamics on the ground. And the second question is, I appreciate what you're saying about knowledge, but I think most people are driven not so much by knowledge, but by narrative. What's the replacement narrative? What's the narrative that counteracts the one that you read out from that rather interesting posting?
So the narrative, we try to stay away from narrative.
Repeat the question.
Well, let's start with the first question first. Would I care to speculate about what may be the impact of the political changes that are happening on the Israeli side and are expected to happen on the Palestinian side? So as far as the Palestinian side, at this point, what all the experts are foreseeing when Abbas leaves the stage one way or another is anarchy. The tensions and the internal dynamics within the Palestinian Authority right now are not looking very positive. Extremists have the upper hand, and you can see that from the levels of violence that have surged in Israel over the past 6 months, a year. The statements by the Palestinian Authority's quote-unquote moderates are not sounding moderate. There is definitely going to be a war of succession. What they're predicting now is the most likely victor in the war of succession is actually Marwan Barghouti, who's sitting in an Israeli prison for life, convicted of various murders of Jewish Israelis. And if he is actually elected by this highly questionable process of selection of a successor, that will not do well, because he can't actually take that position and exert any kind of real leadership from inside a prison, and Israel will be put on the spot once again. Letting him out would be a travesty. Keeping him in will mean that the entire Palestinian structure will implode. So we're between a rock and a hard place once again. And again, I will stress, this situation and what we saw this evening and many other of the massive problems that Israel is facing in places outside of Judea and Samaria, in the Negev and the Galilee, they are all Israel's own creation. We allowed, our governments, successive governments, have created this situation, but we at Regavim are 100% sure that we can also create the solutions. So that's what we try to push. As far as the political changes that are happening on the Israeli side, we're far more optimistic. As a matter of fact, the policy issues that Regavim has been, I would say, formulating and pushing onto the top of the Israeli agenda for 16 years are now the core issues in the formulation of this coalition. All of the issues that we have been shouting about pretty much as lone voices for over a decade are now the top of the public agenda, and the people who are pushing them have all been affiliated with Regavim one way or another, people even from behind the scenes. So the person who's now going to be put in charge of the civil administration, which is essentially the sovereign in Judea and Samaria, was one of our 3 founding members. The person who will be a minister in the Ministry of Defense and who will be the Minister of Interior was a second of our founding members. A third person who was just today assigned to be in charge of the Negev and Galilee from inside the minister's office. The head of this minister's office is our current director of operations at Regavim. So all of the policy upon which this coalition agreement is being formulated actually came more or less, almost all of it, out of Regavim. That includes judicial reform, that includes dismantling the civil administration, extending Israeli law and enforcement to Yehuda and Shomron, solving the problem of ownership claims and land regulation in the Negev, the national construction code that has cut illegal construction nationwide by 70%. It's known as the Kamenetz Law. We wrote it, we helped push it through, and it was the main issue upon which the Arab parties actually campaigned in the previous elections and on which they predicated their participation in the outgoing coalition. So all of these issues that 15 years ago no one outside of Regavim had any awareness of are now in the spotlight, at the top of the agenda, and we have some hope, at least, that things will begin to move in the right direction to reassert a Zionist land use policy throughout Israel. Question?
As I understand it, as you described it, the Arab sector of the PA have essentially abrogated every aspect of every accord that has to do with land use in Yehuda and Shomron. The only entity that would enforce law there, or does enforce law there on an ongoing basis, is the Israeli side, whether it's the law courts or the civil administration. Why not do what you did with your illegal structure last month? Why not build on the 70% of the land that belongs, in quotes, to the PA, and force the government to enforce the laws of who has jurisdiction where, by way of setting a precedent as to who has jurisdiction also in Area C?
It's a very, rather than saying that we want the government now to enable construction in areas A and B, we want the government of Israel, first of all, to unfreeze construction in Area C. We actually just released all new data in this report. You can see it on the website. The number of illegal structures in Area C, built by the Arabs, currently stands at 81,137. The number of illegal Israeli structures in Area C currently stands at 4,300. So, this is not an up-to-date map, but it's important. This is what we saw here, but a little bit up close. You can have a look. Look at the footprint of Israeli settlement in Area C. Those are the blue dots. All Israeli presence in Judea and Samaria accounts for less than 1% of the territory. When taken as a percentage of just Area C, it's under 2%. That means we're not growing. And all the international outcry when you hear about illegal construction in the settlements, etc., it doesn't change the footprint. We are staying within the existing lines of the Jewish communities. So even those 4,000 illegal structures, and I'm talking about 4,000 illegal structures, all told, grand total, they're all inside, more or less, inside existing Jewish communities. So if somebody built a garage in Efrat, it's counted. But the Palestinian Authority has taken over 20% of Area C. They build out, we build up. That's the first thing that Israel has the power to change without any question, without any pushback. And the more ground you cede, the more ground you pass on, the worse it's going to be when you finally do wake up one day and decide to exercise your rights. So, for example, I just realized that I had these in my bag by accident. These, if you look at them carefully afterwards, I'll pass them around. These were plans submitted by the Palestinian Authority that our outgoing Minister of Defense, Benny Gantz, was going to approve as a gesture to President Biden when he visited in August, right? These are insane. They would have cut off all of Gush Etzion from Jerusalem. They would have created a presence of the Palestinian Authority in Jerusalem itself. They would have connected massive Arab towns in area through Area C, creating blocks of a Palestinian Authority control. Insane, just insane. And you think,
sorry, whose proposal was it?
pardon me?
Whose proposal was
Benny
it?
Gantz.
Palestinian Authority submitted these proposals, and Benny Gantz was going to approve them. We got wind of it because we have someone who sits in the Planning Commission as an observer in every Planning Commission hearing. And when he saw these plans coming up for approval, we sounded the alarm. We put up billboards all over Jerusalem. We wrote news to the newspapers. We went crazy. We went knocking on every single member of Knesset's door, showed them the map, and said, this is what he's going to do. Now, because of the legal framework that exists in Area C, he can do this. And he's the sovereign, essentially. The Minister of Defense is in control. We blocked it. We don't know for how long, and luckily the elections came in the middle, and we don't believe that these things are going to go through so easily anymore with the new Minister of Defense coming in. Who that will be yet, probably Yoav Gallant. But these things, someone has to keep an eye on them, because Benny Gantz believes in another two-state solution. And the only way to stop that is if enough people here in Toronto and in Brussels and in France and in England and everywhere else will say, we've tried this, it's not working. Our governments should not be supporting something that will bring about an incredible security threat to the existence of the State of Israel. International pressure works. Unfortunately, we haven't used it to our benefit, and it's time we have to change that. And that's why you're here. So let's get to work. Yes.
So you talked about massive money coming in from the EU. One, why? What's the motivation of the EU? And two, if you're going to counter this, I imagine you need massive money. So where are you getting your money from?
Well,
And repeat the question.
Okay, so the question was, what is the motivation behind the European Union's meddling in this affair, in our business, essentially? And number two, if there's so much money pouring in to prop up the Palestinian side, what chance do we have? And where are we getting our money from? So, unfortunately, yes, the amount of money that's coming in to support the Palestinian Authority's takeover is massive. I just got a document about a $952 million package that was granted to the Palestinian Authority for Jerusalem alone. $952 million. They call it the Jerusalem Metropolis, and it is to create the Palestinian capital in Jerusalem. $952 million for Jerusalem. In addition to all that, there's 8 billion euros. 8 billion euros. The European Union and its member states have just signed all sorts of cooperative agreements with the Palestinian Authority. Massive money. Just massive. We can't outspend them. And if I tell you what Regavim's budget is in a year, you'll laugh. But what we can do is we can empower the government of Israel to do what it already has the power to do and has not had the courage to do. The state of Israel has within its rights and its abilities the opportunity to cut off funding at the source, to prohibit the transfer of money. These things come through international banking instruments that Israel can interdict funding or can garnish the money that is transferred, as you mentioned. Thank you. Israel has a lot of capabilities and it has a lot of law on its side, and it simply has to have the resolve to use those tools. All this illegal construction, Israel is completely within its rights under international law to simply bulldoze it or to stop it before it starts. But the international pressure is what keeps Israel from doing that. So we need to exert equal and opposite pressure. How much money does Israel need in order to do this? Well, Regavim needs money to convince the government that it can, should, must act now. And that this cannot be put at the bottom of the list of priorities. Fighting Iran's nuclearization is important, but it's not one or the other. It has to be done simultaneously, or there won't be anything to argue about. Now, I'll add one more thing about this press release and the Just Peace Toronto, or whatever they're called, and Peace Now, with whom we have an ongoing, let's call it a conversation. There's we're often accused of being anti-Arab. We're not. We're often accused of being racist. Racism has nothing to do with it. We're often accused of all the bad words. We're not any of those things. We work, actually, there are Bedouin mayors in the Negev who have finally understood, after 15 years, that our policy recommendations will make life better for everyone, will make the future for Bedouin residents of the Negev livable, and is the only way forward in a democratic state. And they've come to us to try to join forces quietly behind the scenes. But I've lost the train of thought. The Peace Now and all of these will say, we want a two-state solution, we have to, and we say, okay, what does that have to do with breaking the law? If you don't have anything left to negotiate about, what are you going to negotiate about? If the state of Israel doesn't enforce the law, and this illegal construction continues to change the map, by the time everybody gets around to it, there won't be anything left to negotiate about. And Israel's starting position will be its ending position, because all of the strategic construction that's going on. I'm going to show you one last map, and this is really going to scare you, and it should. All the strategic construction that's going on in Judea and Samaria will leave us with nothing left to talk about. So even if you say you want a negotiated two-state solution, the law has to be enforced first if you want something to negotiate about. What I'm going to show you now is essentially a map of this. I downloaded this from the internet as well. This is called Spatial Plans for Palestinian Communities in Area C of the West Bank, from the Palestinian government's Ministry of Local Government. And inside, it has plans for development of all of the West Bank, areas A, B, and C. This is just C. They have already done with areas A and B. Every page here tells you which government, which foreign government is funding this area's development, how much of the land in this particular plan is currently occupied by a Jewish community, how much of it is currently occupied by an IDF base, how much of it is currently occupied by Israeli highways, what the legal status is, how much of it is actually occupied by Palestinian construction, how many demolition orders or work stop orders are already outstanding for each one of these areas. All the information is right here. So we took this and we mapped it out so that we could see where we're holding. I don't know if that's really English, right? This is a map that shows you Palestinian Authority's current situation on the ground, Israel's current situation on the ground, and its projected development plans. Okay, I'm going to hold it up to see if we can get all of this in. You don't need to be a map expert to see what our situation is. The solid black are existing Palestinian communities. The blue, solid blue, are Israeli existing communities. The blue stripes are the areas that the State of Israel has plans to develop. And the black striped areas are the Palestinian Authority's development plans. Do you see the difference? The State of Israel not only is enforcing a status quo on itself in terms of its growth, it's not planning for the future. It's made no policy statement about how it wants Judea and Samaria to look in 10 years, in 15 years, in 50 years. Nothing. The Palestinian Authority hasn't been sitting and waiting for us. They have not only changed the reality on the ground, they have planned out every inch. This is what they want it to look like. And we're allowing this to actually become a reality. It's time before it's too late for the State of Israel to wake up and say, okay, we have national interest in maintaining Judea and Samaria. We have a legal right, we have a historic right, we have a moral right, and we have an obligation not only to our children but to our great-grandchildren to change this before it becomes a reality. We believe that the State of Israel has every capability to do this, and we just want to make them aware that we're waiting, but we're not waiting patiently. Thank you for your attention.